Topping Talks. 105 hours a week can't be beat. Welcome to Topping Talks. Topping Talks is a Topping Tribune production, and today's episode is proudly sponsored by Topping Technologies and ExpressVPN. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. I have to say he's quite handsome and brilliant. If you're a business in Texas that could use a hand, reach us at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also, are you part of the 3.6% of Americans who still care about privacy? If you are, then perfect. ExpressVPN can assist. Even though 96% of stats are made up on the spot, ExpressVPN does give 100% satisfaction guarantee with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, without further ado, I'm proud to say I'm interviewing today my old friend, Don Rowley, current CIO at ATX Networks.
Good afternoon, Nick. How are you?
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Don. I appreciate it.
Good. You're welcome. I'm enjoying being here. You didn't tell me I was going to be your first podcast interviewee.
Well, no pressure.
So I'm a little intimidated, but a little honored at the same time.
Absolutely.
So,
well,
thanks.
you were one of my first clients when I started Topping Technologies, too.
There you go. It's been a good journey there so far.
Oh, it's been a lifetime. So I know it goes back a couple of years, but how do you first get into IT?
Wow, IT. I told you a little while ago, that's an interesting question because when I was in high school, I actually wanted to be a marine biologist. In fact, if you go look at my yearbook, there's people are saying, hey, it'll be cool to hear stories of you living under the ocean and all this kind of stuff. I also had time where I want to be a doctor. So I spent all my time in high school actually studying biology and things around sciences in order to kind of go that direction. In 11th grade, I got derailed by Apple computers.
Which model?
The Apple II.
What?
Apple II.
Most popular?
And yeah. And it was in the math lab. They called it computer math at the time, but it was really learning like basic programming and solving basic equations and doing some graphing and things like that on the Apple II. But I don't know, that got me introduced to computers, and I kind of thought, well, maybe I like computers too. The same year, I also took they called it economics, but it was really basics of investing. So I took an investing class where they gave us like fake money to play with to follow stocks in the newspaper. I'll date myself because it was like literally actually in the newspaper.
Oh, really?
And we had to chart our performance, and I actually came out pretty well. At the end of the year, I would have made several $1,000s. This is back in 1981.
Oh, nice.
On stocks. And so I thought, well, maybe I want to do investing.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, I had this strange situation where I had an uncle who was having cataract surgery. And at the time, you go into the hospital, it was like a week 5 days in the hospital, and then recovery, and somebody had to watch over you. You think about this right today. I mean, you got cataract surgery today, which is like done in a couple hours, and it's day surgery, and nobody even thinks about it. But back then, it was a big to do. So I went up to go look after him for a semester, really. When we found out he had lung cancer, but during that time, I ended up staying a year with him. During that time, I kind of broke up my year into 2 or 3 month segments, and I just started going deep on computers. Like I had a Sinclair computer at the time.
Oh, no way.
And I literally tried to build my own hard disk interface because it had tape at the time. And I thought, well, how hard could this be? This is just some programming. And it was wildly more complicated than I thought. But I actually tried to build my own interface off of a Sinclair to a hard drive. So that was interesting. I spent some time doing some more, looking at stocks. I spent some more time looking at biology. I spent some more time thinking about what I wanted to do in the medical field, which for me would have been trauma medicine. Anyway, I used each of those kind of 2 months at a time to think about all that stuff, and finally decided I was going to not look back, and I was going to go into the IT field. I was going to get a degree in computer science. I was going to take a minor in photography, but I was going to do a double major in finance. And my rationale was, if I'm going to be doing things that are computer related, chances are I probably ought to understand what the business side is doing, so that whatever decision those manager-like people and owners of companies make, at least I'd understand the context of it in my little technical world. And that started my path in IT. So I spent a lot of time doing programming work in college. My first IT job was I was a state employee where I ran the computer network for the university and the computer mainframe at Stephen F. Austin State University, working the midnight to 7 shift.
Oh my God.
So I would come in at midnight, and I would make sure all the batch jobs that ran the university's system got kicked off properly, and then I'd do my homework while I was waiting for all those jobs to finish, and then they saved themselves to disk, and these disks were like washing machine size disk arrays, and you had to make sure that those were all fine. But then all these printouts would spit out on these big giant line printers, which were the size, honestly, of like a small refrigerator.
Oh my God.
And it was my job to take all those printouts and split them all up and put them in the right person's box. So the next morning when they came in, all their printouts were there. So I kind of babysat the mainframe at night. Since I was there all night, we decided to keep the computer lab open. So we would let students come in all night and work on their programs and work on their terminals and things like that. And I kind of ran that lab too, since I volunteered to. I was up there all night. But I did that for 2.5 years. And when I left that, I was hired by a company called Arthur Young at the time, one of the big 8 accounting firms in Dallas. And they hired me. I was the third person that they'd hired for this role, which they called an internal IT support network person. And they told me in the interview, it's like, you should know, we're not paying much for this job. I think at the time it was like $35,000 or something. And they told me, hey, we're not paying much for this job because we fired the last 3 people who have had this job because nobody's been able to do what we needed done. And I was like, okay, I tell you what, everything you've described to me, I can do. And if I'm still here in 6 months and you haven't fired me, then you're going to bring my salary up to market. I stayed there 3.5 years.
That's awesome.
So, and really, literally my first job was the audit department. Arthur Young at the time was all Mac based. You remember those Mac Pluses, big, Mac cube that you carried around?
Oh, the colored ones.
Not the colored ones.
The
ones that were the taupe colored, like literally a Mac Plus. They were a kind of big cube looking box, and kind of the color of your walls actually for the case, and then just a little 9-inch screen or something in the thing.
I seen those.
And the tax department was all PC based, and they were trying to get the audit department. They had 2 main goals. One, they wanted to get the audit department on a network, which had never been done in Arthur Young before in most offices around the country. So I came in and built the first network on a thing called Apple Talk, and the PC world was on, the tax department was on PC. Well, another guy got that all networked together on, I don't remember, probably Token Ring or something like that at the time. But then they wanted the 2 to talk together. So this guy, I believe his name was Buffington.
Really?
Seriously, I don't know what his first name was. Everybody called him Buff, and that's who he went by. But he and I figured out how to get the audit department and the tax department on the same network. And whatever we did, they liked enough because they sent it up to the mothership in Cleveland or whatever, where Arthur Young was based, and got that office wired up and whatever based on the template that we came up with. And I just did general support, and then I started working for the partners and doing things for various clients that were IT related. Nothing of my background. All my background was software development, but this turned into all network work. But that was kind of my first launch into IT.
That's awesome. Did they also have a mainframe?
I'm sure they probably did back in Cleveland, but nothing in Dallas that I'm aware of.
What did the university have when you were working on that mainframe?
It was a Honeywell CP6, Honeywell Bull CP6 mainframe, and it was an unusual mainframe because it was not based on IBM technology at the time, which was the dominant standard.
Yeah.
It was actually based on Berkeley USD Unix. So
really?
It was actually a Unix-based mainframe. So,
oh my gosh!
And I think this thing took up the corner of a several thousand square foot room, and I think there's probably more computing power in Apple Watch or something today than there was in that whole cabinet. I mean, you could open up the doors on this thing and almost walk into it for the to see the memory and the processor cores and things like that were on it. But
I don't know. I don't know why, but ever since I got into IT, I've always been fascinated by just the pinnacle of what used to be technology, which was the mainframe. Like every business had to have one of those giant computing monstrosities.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know IBM still makes them. Just you know.
Yeah, they still have their place and their purpose or whatever. But anyway, for me at the time, it was a foray to get into the IT world, and my career progressed pretty oddly after that. I had to learn I had some Unix background, obviously because of the mainframe work, and then one of the partners had some work that needed to be done for one of their clients, and they were all Unix based. So I learned more Unix to get something done, and then some people at Nortel heard that I had Mac skills and Unix skills, and Nortel was all Mac and Unix based. So I got hired to do the campus consolidation in Dallas at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, so really early 90s, when Nortel was growing like crazy and they were consolidating multiple campuses onto the big building that's now on 75 in Richardson. I was one of the first 40 people to move into that building, but we did all the networking work and all the prep for bringing literally 9,000 people into that campus. And I stayed there through that project, and then I went to work finally got to do what I was, my background was for, which was software development. I went to work for a small startup. So go from a company that had literally like 80,000 people in it to a company that had 13 people in it, in the healthcare space, so completely different, where I helped build an application on.
What inspired you to take that leap? Because that's a whole different environment, going from 80,000 to
I don't know. This is mid 90s, and software development was going, early 90s, 91, 92. So, software development's going crazy, and it's really where I wanted to be. That was what my degree was in. So I really wanted to be doing software development. So I was trying to get back into that, and I ended up being the only programmer for 2 years. But we built an application that did physician credentialing for healthcare plans, both as a service, but then we built the database and started selling the access to the data. And keep in mind what I'm talking about here, right? This is 92, 93 timeframe. Mm-hmm. We kept growing. We hired 2 more people, and basically 3 of us built this application that ended up being used by 200-something healthcare companies across the United States. The owners sold out in 97 to a group of people. At the time, we were doing a lot of data work. Like, we were taking data from 350 different sources, putting it all together, making it available for the plans that were doing the physician credentialing, or we were starting to put it on the web.
Oh wow!
And a small company at the time called WebMD came knocking, and they ended up absorbing most of our data because we were trying to build the guy Mike and I, who did most of the work. We were trying to get the company to build a search engine around our healthcare data and license it, but the owners of the company at the time just started selling the data. And once they'd sold it all to WebMD went crazy, and this company was bankrupt 2 years later.
Oh wow!
So I left there, and
because I know WebMD is still around. I see them all the time if you're referencing, looking up symptoms and stuff. They're they always are one of the top results.
Somehow they were real interested, because we had built this database that was literally every doctor, MD, DO, nurse, anesthetist, lots of different things all together in one place. Fabulous team of people, great company, but the new owners, they just didn't quite get where the internet was going at the time, and to me, made some bad decisions that resulted in that company. Unfortunately, it was very frustrating, because I was watching 7 years of work really get thrown away in the space of about 8 or 9 months. So it was pretty challenging. I went to work then for a company called at the time it was CSX Lines, but it's what was left of a large container shipping company that was called Sealand, that was sold to a company called Maersk. Maersk couldn't take the domestic business because of some laws on the
antitrust, I'm guessing, because they're huge.
No, it's not antitrust. It's really? In most countries, you have the equivalent of what we have in the U.S. called the Jones Act, which protects supply lines, especially in times of war. So, like, you can't have an airline or coastwise shipping that's owned by a foreign entity, because in times of strife or times of war, the government wants to be able to rely on those supply lines to co-opt them if need be for military needs. And if you've got foreign entanglements, it's a problem. And almost every country have these. So when Maersk bought the portion of Sealand, they can only buy the international book of business, and they were left with the domestic business. So overnight, they went from being, Sealand went from being a multi-billion-dollar company to about a $600 million company.
Oh wow!
And I was on a team of 3 people that was tasked with basically taking that IT infrastructure and shrinking it to the size it needed to be and transforming it. And at the time, they had the container movement system was on legacy IBM mainframe technology.
Oh, wow.
The back office business was on a tool called Power Builder, which integrated with SQL database. And because they had never quite finished the transition off the IBM stuff, was an integration between the two. And then somewhere in there, the web started being developed. So they had stopped the Power Builder development except for maintenance, and were moving everything to web-based and .NET and SQL. But they'd only gotten so far on that and built an integration between the other two. So it was this big integration, and we had to choose one of those technologies and move forward. So we chose the web technology, and basically, ultimately over about 3 years, shut down the mainframe, shut down all the Power Builder stuff, migrated everything to the web-based assets. And I was leading a team of web architects and database people as a result of my experience with the startup. Somewhere in there, I got asked if I could handle infrastructure, so I took over infrastructure. Somewhere in there, I got asked if I could handle the database people that were running the ERP system, so I took over that and worked real closely with another guy who was running the ERP system. But then I learned a lot about ERPs during that time. And you had another question for me here. It's like, what was a pivotal career moment that led to me being a CIO? I think a lot of it, honestly, was at that time when I was at Horizon Lines. It was what the company ultimately ended up being named after C-Lines, CSX Lines, and then went through a couple of private equity things, but known as Horizon Lines. I'd say that period was really critical to me because it allowed me to have my first management role. Second, it allowed me to adopt the infrastructure at scale. It allowed me to adopt the ERP side of the world, at least part of it, at scale. But then I had a boss there, a guy named Jeff at the time, who I really owe my current role to, because Jeff was a great CIO. There's actually two people there that were really pivotal to me, and I'll tell a couple of stories. But Jeff was a CIO at the time I left, and I was a senior manager at the time, and you know what? He may have actually still been director of IT. I think he was still director of IT. Rick was still the CIO at the time, or Trisha. Trisha may have taken over. I'm not sure which one, but the guy who I'll back up a little bit. The guy who hired me at Horizon Lines was a guy named Rick Kessler when he was putting this team together. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have Rick to thank. He did some really cool things really early on when we were shrinking the team and we were trying to get rid of some contractors that we just didn't know what they were doing. I remember we had this one contractor who was very controversial. He was billing the company a lot. Nobody knew what he did. I dug in to find out what he was doing and find out he was, running things on the company that may have been personal. And he was doing radio shows and TV shows and, billing a lot of dollars. And I was like, look, you find out we really didn't need him. But he had everybody believing that, you needed this guy's services, or otherwise everything was going to fall apart. And I was like, we really don't need him at all. So I went and told him, and I was tasked with eliminating about $1 million of budget. Well, his was seriously like a third of that. So
oh my gosh.
I remember the day I told him, he got up, he looked at me, and he said, "This is wrong. You guys are going to die." And he literally got up from the table, walked straight into the CIO's office, Rick, and said, "This guy's letting me go. You need to tell him he's full of shit." And Rick looked right at that guy and said, "Whatever Don says goes." And in that instant, he legitimized my authority and what I needed to do at that company. And word got around about that in terms of the analysis of what we needed to do and, where we needed to go. And I went on, I stayed at that company for 10 years. Well, toward the tail end of it, we'd been through multiple evolutions of, the company, one private equity firm, another private equity firm. We had gotten to things that were running super, super stable. I was a senior manager at the company at the time. But I really wanted to move on to director role. But the guy ahead of me, Jeff, who was the director of IT at the time, he was really good at what he did, and he wasn't going anywhere. So I really credit him with sitting down one day and saying, "Don, look, you've got all the skills, you need to go, but it's probably not going to happen here." And even though I was still there, he started working with me and the CIO, Trisha, by that time, to start honing my skills, knowing that I was going to leave the organization at some point. And as much as they didn't want me to go, I had kind of grown as far as I could go at that point in time. And when the opportunity to leave came up, it came pretty quickly. I had a guy who I'd done some volunteer work with outside of Horizon, at a place called SciTech Discovery Center. And at the time, he was the CIO of a company called Genband.
Oh, yeah.
And when Genband bought a portion of Nortel, so fast forward, I started, I did some work at Nortel in the early 90s.
Yeah.
By 2010, Nortel was bankrupt and being dismantled. And Genband bought a portion of it. And that company was going to go from 400 people overnight to, I don't know, like 2,100 people or something. And Rick hired me to basically be the director of IT and to manage part of that transition. And when I went there, that was really great. Anyway, that event right there was probably, Jeff working with me at Horizon Lines to say, look, you've gone about as far as you can go here, but the recognition and the trust that he had as a mentor to me, that I really just needed to go someplace else, was really pivotal because it set the stage for me being able to go to Genband. Genband was the launch pad to, after I'd been there for 5 years, a CEO I'd worked with before calling me up and saying, hey, look, I need a CIO to a company we're acquiring. And, based on what I'd done at Genband, he hired me, and that was my first role as a CIO, was when I went to Imagine Communications. So
That's awesome. So
but none of that would have happened without the really candid but truthful conversations that Jeff and I had when I was at Horizon Lines, that, I was just going to have to make a change in order to get to the next level, because it wasn't going to happen there as much as I wanted it to. So I really credit Jeff with that recognition and that mentorship at the time. And it's funny, I'm still friends with Jeff today. I don't talk to him a whole lot, but fast forward a few years, his daughter's in gymnastics, and my son, who is also in gymnastics, is her coach.
Really?
Yeah. So I see Jeff from time to time and at various gymnastics events. Not real often, but anyway, he and I still talk from time to time. So it's really kind of a weird way things work out in that respect. But
those
anyway.
are the rarest, but most valuable people when you're at a company, and they actually want to train you to go beyond where your current position is, even though they know you will probably leave that company. I think I know there's this famous quote Richard Branson once says, train everyone like they're going to train them so that they're good enough to leave, but treat them good enough so that they don't want to.
Yeah.
But very few companies actually, especially kind of cliches, especially when the companies grow, sometimes they lose some of that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how those types of people invest in you.
Yeah. It was interesting. Like I said, I was very fortunate. There was a really good distillation of good people there, right? I mean, when you look at Rick giving me the opportunity to have my first management role, I certainly appreciate that. The triad of leadership that we had with Jeff and Tricia at the time, and then, they'd been at that company for a while, so they had a natural progression plan, and I was actually coming in from the outside, which was not unusual, but I was an outsider on that team, but like I said, I was there for 10 years, so we formed a really great partnership over time. Tricia grew into the CIO role at some point. Jeff grew into the director of IT role at some point, and there was just no clear progression for me other than to go. And they were both part of thoughtfully recognizing that when the opportunity came that they'd probably lose me, and but it was good. I mean, it was the right way to do a transition in my mind, right? To progress to another level. So I've always appreciated their leadership during that time. And then obviously when Brad's leadership, I have a funny story about Brad. The first day on the job, he came into my office, and I'd known Brad for about a year and a half, and he had worked in this volunteer organization, so we knew each other's style and had a real good trust level already. But my first day on the job, he came in. It's like, Don, I'm really, really busy. I'm not sleeping much right now. You've got $9.5 million to get this infrastructure transition done. Don't F it up. And that literally was his entire handoff to me.
Yeah.
And from there we took it. So we had this really high trust level, which is really good. And I appreciated him showing that trust level because it allowed us to get a lot of things done in a really short period of time and make some really good decisions. And rarely as an IT person do you have a chance to build something, from nothing to something. Yeah. IT was 3 people at the time. When I left, it was 40-something people.
Oh, wow.
And, we had to hire a lot of those people in flight at the start of that project. So it was fun building an IT organization in Greenfield and getting going. And it was very rewarding. And then, like I said, obviously as a result of that, the CIO, Charlie, when he went to Imagine, called me and said, hey, I need a CIO. And it's like when somebody's getting ready to punch that card, you kind of take that opportunity. But all that other stuff laid the groundwork to kind of get to that role. But, I think it's comprised of a lot of things, right? even though my background was software development, being willing to take on infrastructure, being willing to take on ERP, or at least portions of ERP, and then ERP at Genband, it kind of rounded out so you had a complete view of the IT organization to be able to lead and shepherd and handle all of it, and not just being one dimensional. And then obviously finance came back around, because having the business background from school, all of a sudden I dug all that stuff back up again, and it just helped me make me a more effective manager in terms of dealing with the mechanics of the business. During that time, especially during that time at Horizon Lines, they were very vested in leadership development. So we spent a lot of time on leadership principles and especially conflict management. And I'd say that event, they used a course called Crucial Conversations, which was still in use today, actually. It's one of the seminal conflict management or conflict resolution training packages or training that's available. We went through that very deeply, and I credit that the leadership skills I learned at Horizon coupled with that conflict management is probably the things that amplified my ability to have better people skills. Because at the end of the day, technology is technology, and all those things are important, but it's people who are doing this technology for you and for companies. So being able to work with people all over the world, people from different cultures, people with different ideas, and being able to bring out the best in those teams and stuff was a result of a lot of that activity at Horizon Lines during that time, and having 10 years to hone leadership skills in a thoughtful and directed way, and Horizon's investment in leadership development at the time. So it's good. I look back, and is a pretty good period of time for me and my family.
So was Charlie the one who first promoted you to the CIO position?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and then you followed him twice, because then after
I did. When I went to, he was the CIO at ATX, and when ATX started, he called me up and said, "Hey, time to move. Come over here." So I left Imagine, went to ATX, and then he ended up leaving, I guess, a year later, and I've been there for going on 3 years now. So,
oh wow,
2.5, almost 3 years. New CEO, but still there.
Yeah.
So it's been good. It's been good.
Oh yeah, once you build a good team, you just kind of keep moving around. I remember going to the office in Frisco. You see all the old ATX swag. I think I saw like some drumsticks with the logo that one of your colleagues had.
So anyway, that's like I say, if you really pivotal was the recognition and the communication while I was at Horizon Lines with my leadership, that while I was good at what I was doing, there was really no place to go. And I remember Jeff actually helped me craft a path to director plan.
Oh, really?
Even though knowing I probably wouldn't be a director at that company for IT. I still have that plan today. I've actually used it with a couple of other people who've been in a similar situation.
Yeah.
And help craft their role to get to a similar sort of similar role. When they were trying to grow from a senior manager or a manager into a director type role. So, anyways, it was a pretty pivotal moment, I guess, in my
absolutely,
at least in my work career, right?
Well, especially, I mean, one of the things that stuck out with me the most thus far from your story is when that one overpriced contractor, when he went to the CIO's office and the CIO stuck up for you. Those types of moments are invaluable. Just to know that they have your back.
Yeah. I like I said, I had a great relationship with Rick, and things like that just showed his leadership. And really, I mean, he set the tone for that organization at the time about how leadership should be done. And so, like I said, I feel fortunate to have been exposed to that kind of continuous leadership development for literally a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And not everybody gets that opportunity, so I'm super thankful for it. But it was the right thing at the right time, and instrumental in helping me become what I am, at least from a CIO standpoint now. Right.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, I mean, you started off with the Sinclair, and then you got to the IBM mainframe. As you keep seeing technology evolve, do you think we'll ever get to 100% cloud, where the data center, won't exist or won't be around? Or what do you think of the current trends, or where do you think it's going from here?
Oh, man, you've got this question here that says, where do you see IT going? And it's like, man, that is like so wide open. I'll probably try to narrow it down a little bit. So the trends that I see right now are interesting because to me, they start more at the people side of things, right? When I've been coaching people on roles and what you do and where you go, the thing that became evident to me, especially when virtualization started coming around, right? And the cloud started coming around, the natural recognition is that, on premise in a company, you're going to have an amplification of end user support needs in all capacities, right? Whether it's with mobile, whether it's with computers, whether it's, with desktops, kiosks, purpose-built appliances, whatever it happens to be, while some people are technical, some people are not. And no matter what, you need support. All of these companies are connected to the internet or connected to a network or both. And, so you've got to have really robust networking, regardless of whether something is a cloud service, because ultimately you depend on that connectivity, both in your company or if you're mobile, whatever it is. So there's an amplification of the need for networking. On the application side of the world, there's certainly an amplification of the need for software development and software architecture and how those things run either on, cloud infrastructure, or on-prem. But with the bias these days, it seemed like being for cloud infrastructure, it really deprecates the middle piece, which is servers. So, so to me, the area that's really impacted is the people who are wanting to work for a corporation or a company, but wanting to do something that's server or storage or kind of that middle tier based. That opportunity to me seems like it's migrating more toward data center type work. So if you really love that type of work, you've either got to find companies that still have legacy environments in that area or have very specialized needs that require them to have that on-prem or have their own data center. Or you're going to end up working for data centers in that area, right?
Yep.
So it like I said, so it seems like there's a concentration to me on end user support, networking, and then of course security lays over the top of that, no matter where you are, right? But a deprecation of the server side of the world, unless you're working for data center type companies where you get to do that at scale, which would be certainly interesting. But it's just fewer data centers, fewer opportunities, fewer roles are needed in that capacity. So I think that's one thing, right? You're seeing a change in the personnel and the people that are needed at traditional companies. I think with regard to security, probably the thing that's been on my mind the most is there are so many security issues in the world today and not near enough people from a talent standpoint to deal with it. So I think AI has got to advance to the point where it's really embedded in things at a hardware level in order to deal with things that there's literally just not enough humans to go around to deal with the instantaneous need to apply rules when a security event occurs, but do it in a thoughtful way that doesn't completely shut down your business or your ability to conduct business, but still contains threats and still manages things. And certainly, I mean, I work for a company that right now is 165 people, and IT is relatively small. We are already, even at that level, swimming in data that we can't get to fast enough to look at results. So you've got to have intelligence behind there to analyze that data and and make intelligent decisions on your behalf in order to get things, done or mitigated when something bad happens, which is inevitable in most organizations, right? I mean, it's not a question of if something's it's when and what and what's the scale of it, and how do you deal with it. So I think there's got to be a lot of work on the AI side of the world to deal with security. As you know, we've talked about all sorts of other things and, offline and, the connected car business and all sorts of other crazy things, right? Where technology is just going crazy. But if you concentrate on IT itself, it's definitely a bias on being comfortable running in the cloud, dealing with security aspects of it, having the networks that allow, everybody's in the work from home mode right now. I really am. I work from anywhere or work from any time.
Yeah.
There's some people that are trying to do a lot of work on their work-life balance and things like that. And some people work great in that mode where you're able to compartmentalize and I work 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or 9 to 5 or whatever. And then I'm not working. There's other people that, and like me, I don't work like that. My brain is, I integrate. So it's more like work-life integration for me. And some of that's a necessity of IT. You know, IT doesn't stop. Things are around the clock. So you've got to put up with the fact that servers don't always die during the middle of the day. Network switches don't always fail during business hours and whatnot, right? Despite what your stated business hours are. So, you know, for me, most of my career, it's been more like setting things up in such a way that you can work from anywhere, anytime. But if you've got to do something during the middle of the day that's personal, great. You do something during the middle of the day that's personal, and you know, you get it done. Doctor appointment, car appointment, whatever. But you know, if it means you're working at 6 or 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night or whatever, then sometimes you're working at 8 o'clock at night. You know, certainly you have to have family time in there. You've got to protect, right? And I know when my kids were young, my wife and I, you know, pretty much from, let's call it 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, I kind of turned work off. Yeah. But it was not uncommon after that to go back and deal with things in the evening from, you know, 10 to midnight, 11 to 1 or whatever, to get things done that you just have to do it in an IT shop when people aren't on systems, or when it's convenient to do, you know, to do things off hours from the core business or whatever. So, you know, most of my work has been more from a work-life integration standpoint rather than a work-life segregation standpoint, right? But everybody's different. Some people, you know, like I said, some people have to work in one style versus another. So
it's funny, most of this, I mean, with my business, and it's usually the busiest time is usually the weekends, not only researching new technologies, but like doing installs and updates. You sure as heck aren't wanting to risk disrupting the business during regular business hours. So IT kind of seems inherently to be, you know, at off hours, so to say.
Yeah, and yeah, it depends on the business, right? Some businesses are super weekend driven, and they've got a couple of days during the middle of the week that you know, that there is their slack time. So, you know, if you're going to be in the IT field, it really just requires you to kind of work in whatever mode you know, the company that you're working for, that you're helping, you know, how they work. But you know, where do you see IT going? You know, again, not on the technology side right now, but the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now is this notion of, look, we're coming out of pandemic, and all this, you know, people have had a recognition that time and other things are maybe more important than they were before, and or their, you know, people's attitudes toward that are changing. So it's really, for IT, is how do you rationalize I hate the term the new normal, but how do you rationalize where we are right now? And the fact that you've got some people who want this work-life segregation, you've got some people who don't mind the work-life continuity or the work-life integration, and how do you build effective teams with those different needs from an employee standpoint to still get done what you need to get done? Because at the end of the day, it's still projects, work, maintenance, you know, fixes, incidents, whatever that you've got to do to move a business forward for what you're doing. And it's really, how do you craft those teams to leverage those various desires and those various things that make employees tick, but also, you know, no employee exists for the sake of being an employee, right? I mean, you're trying to get something done for yourself. You're trying to get something done for an organization. So how do you meet your personal goals? How do you meet the organization's goals? And how do you you know, craft the right, you know, the right team structure or the right team expectations, and leverage the various capabilities and skills and desires of all these different competing needs to still get done what needs to get done, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge. So, you know, from an IT standpoint, it's not necessarily technical; it's the people side of it right now. So,
and do you think it'll ever go back to where there's 100% traditional office capacity, where you have, you know, headquarters downtown and everyone's commuting again?
I mean, I think there may be companies that are like that, right? And there may be companies that are like that out of necessity. And there may be companies that are like that out of the desire of the people who work for that company, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you a great example. I mean, not everybody works well from home. Yeah. In our current company, our main sales guy, who's responsible for literally, you know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, he's not comfortable working from home. We don't have an office here in Texas, except we have an executive suite where the guy literally lives like half a mile away, but he goes to this executive suite every day because that's what he needs to feel effective, to deliver what needs to be done for our, you know, for the current company I work for, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's just a recognition, like I said, of where people are and what lets them function at their highest level to get done what needs to get done. So look, if you had a company where 100% of the people love being around each other and want to be in the same space, and they need to be at the same space to get done what that business wants to do, then I think you'll see that, right?
Oh yeah.
But if you've got companies who are equally successful where no one is even in the same location, and they're still getting things done. I think that works too, right? I mean, again, I'll use the company I work for right now. CEOs based in Santa Rosa, CIOs based in Texas, head of marketing is based in Texas, head of engineering for one business line is in San Diego, CFOs in Atlanta, head of business, another business line is based in Ottawa. So we have a highly distributed management team, yet we're still very close. We meet regularly, albeit most of the time virtually, but we've got a very high trust level where we're working together and we're doing great things for the company that we're working for right now. I mean, we've had, great revenue growth over the last 2 or 3 years. From a turnaround perspective, from a private equity, ownership standpoint, we've got a really good success on our hands right now with a highly distributed team at a management level. We've got 2 warehouses. People have to be in the warehouse. Maybe they don't want to be, but if they want to work in warehouse, warehouses aren't virtual. So, somebody's got to be on the ground, and those people are doing an awesome job at what they do. But we've got a certain percentage of the company that's working from home, and they'll probably never go back to working in an office again, right? So I think it's, it's knowing what your business needs to get done, finding the people that match match the style of business that you want to run, and to meet the business's goals, and you're going to find that you're successful hiring to that mindset, right? So if, like I said, if you've got people who want to work 100% virtually and that's what they want to do, and you've got leadership of a company that's comfortable with that and wants to run a company that way, then great, go find that mindset, and you'll probably be better off for it than not. If leadership wants to run a company where it's more closely knit, then you have to go find the people who want to be in a building and working together to get something done. And you know what? You'll find those people as well, because there's it's not like we have one mind share of the way people want to work in the world today, right?
Absolutely.
Anyway,
and plus, I mean, you're going to see, I just can't imagine, especially from a CFO and CEO perspective, how much money they're saving right now when it's not, of course, we know it's not just the cost of the headquarters, the land or the lease. You've got the internet, you've got the AC, all those costs add up. Then you got liability insurance if something falls on the headquarters or something. I mean, there's so much upside to either decreasing your headquarter footprint or eliminating it completely.
Yeah. But there could be upside to having a on-prem building, right? I mean,
absolutely.
If you've got the talent and the mind share and the business you're running needs to be on-prem, all of those things are just cost of doing business. And the fact that you've elected to spend money on those things may actually enhance your business, right?
Sure.
And so it really just depends on what you're trying to get done and the style of the people who want to work together. And, in an ideal world, every company would know what it wants to be and know how it wants to hire and operate, and that there's a big enough talent pool that you find the people that want to work in that style.
Absolutely.
Right. And I don't know if we're there. I don't know what the composition of all the IT employees are in the United States or in the world, but my guess is we probably have a mismatch between how leadership wants to work and how employees want to work, and everybody's trying to sort out that balance right now, right? And,
agree. There's a couple articles past 12 months as everyone's having these conversations where the biggest misconception or the biggest polarity is the CEOs. Like, they did all these polls, all the CEOs really want feats and seats, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
And then the workforce, they polled them, and over 60% they want to keep working from home for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah. I would wonder if that's generational, right? Chances are,
I would think so. Partially.
I'm probably on the older end of the scale from a management standpoint. I would question whether that's true of CEOs across the spectrum. Down to 20-year-old CEOs, or 75 or 80-year CEOs, right? It may be just what people are used to and comfortable with from a leadership style, right? And maybe that takes care of itself over the next 10 or 15 years as one population ages out and CEOs come up. I don't know, right? But I would be curious about that analysis or that statistic to know whether there's a generational bias to that particular situation.
That's very few. That's like one of three or four useful things I learned from college. Is we had a course on business statistics, and the teacher or professor was always always ask, know your sample.
Yeah.
What's it
what's the
consistent?
sample?
Because like a lot of things in life, facts are true and polls are true, but you can also vary it greatly on how you say it and then who you poll it to.
Yep.
So that's why I always try to take things with a grain of salt when you're looking at all the news these days in general.
Yeah. And honestly, look, I mean, a lot of CEOs, depending on their background and the need for their company, a lot of them have to be technical. They have to be sales. They have to be people.
Yep.
And if you're a people person that generates activity off of being around other people, and you need that in order to operate effectively, and you need your team, then it's probably it's that bias that's craving being around, because they perceive themselves as more effective when that team is together. Now, does it mean the entire company needs to be together, or the core management team needs to be together? Again, I think that's more a factor of the comfort level of the people involved. Like I said, I'm working for a company right now where the management team's highly distributed, but we get together from time to time in person.
Yeah.
We have our trust level that we've established being together. We have our trust level that we've established being apart. We're very good on expectations management of what we do. We have all the tools at our disposal to reach any of us anytime we need to get a hold of one another to get something done. And we're comfortable with that. And, in our current CEO, he seems to be super comfortable in that, in that world as well. If he's not, he hides it really well. Let's put it that way.
And then kind of I don't know if it's still a timely topic, but I know over the past couple of years when you and I were hanging out and talking about the different challenges to ATX and the industry in general, can you elaborate a little bit on because I didn't realize how much the shipping logistics changed, not just in cost, but also complexity when you're trying to move products around the globe. I guess, can you elaborate that issue a little bit? And then is that still an issue today, or how's it progressing?
It's definitely still an issue.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect me so directly, but our company, look, we build products right now for the company I work for that goes literally at layer one, physical components that go in that move bits of light and electrons around that connect the internet.
Yeah.
So from a cable-based system and from an optical-based system. And, for us, we used to measure lead times on equipment and parts in, 12 and 16 weeks lead times, whatever, right? We've got suppliers right now that are quoting us lead times on basic components that are 52 weeks out, 60 weeks out.
60?
Before that component's available. For us, we've seen, I think, close to a 40% increase in metal costs alone. So if you're building a chassis for something, right, with a box to put a gear in, and you've had a 40% increase in cost on that, how do you pass that on effectively to your customers without sticker shock? So all this notion that we see right now with people saying, "Oh, we don't understand why inflation's so bad." I don't know what documents they're reading, but the documents we see from our suppliers seem to say, "Look, there's a lot of inflationary pressure in things." And I think the supply chain's getting itself sorted out in terms of movement. It's more now the availability, and I guess what's taken center stage now is the inflation piece of it is starting to get the forefront, and where the supply chain issues were kind of in the forefront now. It's not like they've gone away; they're still there. My personal feeling is, from what I see, supply chain is probably another 3 years before it comes back to what anybody would consider close to normal.
And when you say the metal went up by 40%, is that cast aluminum?
It's basically sheet metal and aluminum, aluminum metal. And I'm sure it's been everything. I mean, I'm not a supply chain guy, and I'm not a components guy in our company, but listening to my peers talk, I mean, it's individual little things, right? Things that go into a simple part that may cost $1, are not available, all the way to things where we use these FPGA, I don't even know what it stands for, field programmable gate array or something like that. Those used to be measured in one thing. Some of those things have seen a 700% increase in cost.
700? Oh my God. Where are they made? I guess
overseas, China, Taiwan, someplace in Malaysia, someplace overseas, right? So anyway, it's not like you can just take that component all of a sudden and pass on a 700% cost increase on a major component of a deal to customers. So you have
to redesign it, or how do you overcome that?
Yeah, the engineers sometimes they are redesigning things to try to get a better cost equation. Sometimes, like anything, we'll put price increases in over time. But even after those things, become available, you may see the price. It may take some time for the price to come back down, even after supply chain, woes and inflationary woes go away, right?
So,
and because we're buying equipment now,
yeah,
right? That we're not receiving until a year from now, which then it doesn't get into the customer's hands until a year, a half a year, 4 months, 4 months after that. So at least 18 months from what we're buying right now at this high price, we've got to sustain selling that, and not losing money on it through that time period. So that's at least a year and a half away, right?
Oh God.
So even if prices start coming back down in that time frame, you're going to have this period of time where
the PO's already cut.
Even if they've peaked, they're still expensive relative to what they really were.
Yeah.
Well, if it's 2 years from now for that price to get back down to, what it was in the past, or even close to what it was in the past, it's even still, and assuming all the supply chain stuff gets worked out, you're still 16 to 20, 26 weeks out from product delivery on there. So it's really easy to see why 3 years from now, you might just be getting back to, something that closely resembles normal, pre-2020, right?
Oh my God.
Anyway, it's just, I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping it's faster than that, but logically you see that happen. When I was at Horizon Lines, the biggest thing that plagued us was fuel charges, right?
Yep.
Cost of fuel. And, we had in our contracts that you could increase the cost of fuel, but it took 90 days to get a price increase into the supply line for a fuel surcharge.
Really?
And then, then you're buying fuel now at a more expensive, or you're buying fuel contracts at a more expensive cost. So it took, 90 days to get your price decreases once fuel started coming down. So there's always this impedance where prices have gone up, and we at the time weren't recognizing fuel surcharges until a whole quarter after the prices went up. Well, then customers on the back end, once prices start to come down, everybody's like, well, when are your prices going to drop? When are your prices going to drop? Well, you can only drop them reflective, or relative to when you're buying equipment that's going into future products. If you've already bought it and it's in inventory, it's got to get bled off. You've either got to take a loss on it, margin erosion, or you've got to sell it at what you were selling it for. In order to in order to make money, right?
Yeah. And
so even as people start seeing prices come down on component levels and products, basic products and components that comprise gear or other products, let's say 8 months from now those prices start coming down, you probably don't see, as a consumer, you don't see some of those prices actually come down until months later, when when the components that went into build that inventory actually get into the shelves, or get into the supply chain to be sold and consumed, right?
And I almost wonder if prices will ever go down, because you've also had increases of the cost of labor.
Yeah, so there'll be some of that. That's why I was careful to say I don't think they'll go back to the way they were.
Yeah.
But they'll go back to more near normal in terms of not being as high as they are. Look, when I was growing up, my mom had a little cartoon hung up on our pantry door in our kitchen, and it was this was probably from the 70s, when gas prices had gone through the roof, and there was a lot of inflation back then. And it was a store owner holding a loaf of bread, and it's like, ma'am, it's simple economics. Price of wheat goes up, price of bread goes up. Price of wheat goes down, price of bread stays up. Right. So I think you're going to see some of that, right? There's people who have taken losses and stuff that they're going to be reticent. They're going to want to recoup that, even if it's a year or two down the line. So you're probably going to see it take a while for some of these prices and stuff to come back down.
And how dramatic, or how has the shipping evolved? Because I remember, like, 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, when COVID was first hitting, you were telling me that for the first time in a long time, you're actually having to bid on the shipping containers because there's such few around.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bid per se. It's just, everybody was jockeying to get containers in the first place, right? And a container might have cost $4,000, and they've been as high as $20,000 to get a container shipped.
And it's a standard shipping container going from China to the U.S.
China to the U.S. or whatever, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Again, all that costs. Companies don't just don't absorb and eat that. Otherwise, you're laying off people, right?
Yeah.
So if everybody wants a company to absorb that cost, that's great.
Yeah.
But it means you're gonna cut costs someplace else.
It's also
so either that, or you pass it along. You pass some portion along to the consumer, and You know, you can have only so much margin erosion before your ownership or your company's not viable,
or shareholders get
whatever, right? You're not going to survive as an entity if you absorb every single price increase that gets hit. So somewhere along they have to get passed on to the consumer, and they do. It takes time to pass it along, and then it takes time to take it out.
Well,
right? So.
Absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest fallacies I noticed in the news, maybe the past, I want to say 6 months. A lot of people were starting to blame the grocery stores, saying these grocery stores are getting they're massive profits. They made more profits this time than any other history. That's why inflation of your groceries is because of them.
Maybe,
well, no, I forget who, but if you look at, because most of them are publicly traded, if you look at their finances, it's one of the most cutthroat industries. Like usually the profit margin is around 2% for groceries. And the reason they're making more money is because they increased the quantity. Their margins were about the same. So they're just increasing the price too, because their cost, retail, their cost went up. It just kind of when you throw a rock in a pond, what is that? Thank you. Yes, the ripple effect. Yeah. Their cost went up, so the cost of consumer went up. Yeah. So our grocery bills went up the same.
Yeah. Well, it piles up along the whole supply chain, right? The labor costs, fuel costs, everything. Everybody who's bringing stuff to that grocery store, all those costs goes up. Same thing. All those people try to pass it along. Well, who's their consumer? Their consumer's the grocery store. Okay, so the grocery store has to pay a little bit more. Whatever. I'm sure there's places out there that are gouging things. I'm sure there's companies that are taking it on the chin and absorbing and buffering their customers from things and every manner in between. Right? I'm not going to get into any conspiracy biases or anything like that. I'm sure there's people out there who want to talk about that stuff. So.
I'm pretty sure that's the majority of the internet is conspiracy theories. But it's just a lot of people don't realize, just like you take one factor, a lot of people don't think about, diesel prices going skyrocketing above $5 a gallon. A lot of people go, who cares? I either have an electric car, I have hybrid, I have a gasoline powered engine. Well, predominantly, most of the groceries and the products, when they get off the train,
everything's affected by that, right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that ripple effect affects pretty much everything. Most products we have, I know Amazon has an electric fleet, I think with Ford and a couple of manufacturers for their deliveries. But if you think about most of the groceries, most of the clothing, consumables we get, usually comes off the shipping freight, goes on to the trains go to the semi-trucks, they get to the store. Yeah. And all that takes fuel, resources, labor, and it's just an ever-growing ripple effect. And I mean, hopefully technology will also evolve so we can have more efficient shipping routes and technologies, maybe drones. I think it's starting to become legal more and more with drone delivery. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see if they can get economies of scale or increase the size of the drone so it could be an actual shipment of groceries to a Walmart or to a retail establishment, which would be pretty fascinating. I don't know if it's possible yet, but
I'm sure we could probably make a whole nother topic around speculation on that.
Easily.
Probably not the best person. I probably have some ideas, but I haven't really thought through that. Somebody's thinking about all that stuff.
I guarantee it. I mean, I know Tesla announced like 2 years ago the semi truck that they're going to come out with. That'll be, in theory, it'll be autonomous, fast, magical. And it'll be revolutionary.
I do think in general, when you say where's IT going, I definitely think there's a bias toward automation. I definitely think there's a bias toward autonomy. In terms of things, right? We talked about this before we sat down for the cast, all the things that will change as a result of having just a certain mass of connected cars talking to one another on the road, and what that means for transportation and what it means for, the ripple effect of not having as many accidents and what that looks like. I mean, there's just a lot of things there. You start taking that stuff vertical and going 3 dimensions with drones or people carriers or whatever it is, right? I mean, it changes the dynamics of a lot of stuff. So.
That's actually, we actually kind of saw that we actually saw that in real time with COVID. When COVID hit, a lot of people don't realize, I think I researched it, don't quote me, but it's like every day on average, there's about 350 car accidents in Dallas-Fort Worth, if you include vendor benders, totals, and all that. And if you think about all the ripple effect, you're employing the police to come up and help clean up, you're employing the insurance companies to pay out, and also the lawyers to litigate. Then you have like two of the largest companies in Texas are Caliber Collision, then you have Service King. Those companies will repair the vehicles.
Yeah, but if there's not many to repair,
and then they have all their suppliers like 3M and all these engineering companies that makes the components and the sandpaper. Yeah. And those companies really hurt really bad when COVID first hit. But then of course you had other companies that grew exponentially, like Microsoft, Zoom, and all those just grew like wildfire.
Yeah. So definitely, I think, jobs in IT are definitely going to have a bias toward the automation side. And like I said, autonomy around transportation, in particular, right? There's just going to be a lot of transformation, I think, in that over the next decade or two.
Absolutely. I mean, we already, with the Teslas, you basically have a baby data center on wheels. They're just going to become more and more interconnected and more efficient and, in theory, safer and secure, hopefully.
Yep.
And I remember you were telling me you do a lot of volunteering earlier in the podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of the Boy Scouts and your
So I've worked. I'm an Eagle Scout. So I was talking about leadership earlier. I mean, some of my earliest leadership, I got out of scouting, right, and I being comfortable being up in front of people and speaking, I'm sure started there. Basic leadership principles and team dynamics, I'm sure I learned, in Scouts early on. Both my kids have been in Scouts. Even after my kids they're in their 20s now or done, I've still, maintained being a Scoutmaster for a troop here in Plano. For me, it's just it's an outlet to do leadership development outside of work with youth.
Yeah.
And help shape the next generation of kids that are coming, to help run the world, that they have some decent leadership skills and foundation, maybe ahead of when they normally would have gotten it in the work world, right? I mean, if you go into college understanding basic team dynamics and formation of teams and teams working through storming phases and getting to a place where they're operating, and then where they're successful, and understanding disruptors to that, and understanding how to deal with conflict. I mean, if you can pick those skills up when you're, a young teenager, regardless whether you're a male or female or whatever, I mean, it just sets you up for to be in a better place when you go into college, and then certainly when you start in the work world, you've already got some of those skills at least partially developed, and hopefully they emerge faster once you get into university, or once you get into whatever line of work you're doing, or a trade or business ownership or management. And maybe it sets you apart, so you're a manager a little bit earlier, or a leader a little bit earlier. Probably just helps your career along. So I do that. As a result of that, I also I teach climbing in Scouts, both gym climbing and rock climbing. I teach people how to do that safely.
Yeah.
People often find it odd, but climbing on rocks and climbing on in a gym, it's 100% risk mitigation, right?
Yeah.
No one wants to get hurt doing that kind of stuff. And IT, oddly, is risk mitigation, right? And change management and things along those lines. So they're actually more compatible than people think in terms of managing risk. And then, as we go trap shooting from time to time. So, shotgun shooting is a passion of one of my sons.
And the Scouts, you do that with the Scouts too.
We do, limited degree. Although it's really interesting in the scouting context, we see fewer and fewer kids interested, in time over interested in shooting related activities. Right? I mean, it's been pretty big change in the last 10 years. I think it reflects the demographics. It reflects the current cultural, bias and things like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still kids who love to go, learn how to target practice and develop a skill. And, certainly we teach how to do all those things safely and respectfully and things like that. I personally, I'm not a hunter. Do
you think it's the parents maybe influencing the kids?
Possibly.
But because the same number of kids are a part of the organization, they're just not joining that particular activity. Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's kind of hilariously ironic. Like when I was a kid, I had the privilege of being a part of the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Yeah. And one of the biggest motivators for me and all my friends was we always wanted to have the opportunity to shoot a gun. Yeah. And the first ever opportunity I had was a bolt action 22 long rifle. Yep. We had I think 3 or 4 days of safety classes before we ever touched the rifle. And of course, it's a controlled, fun environment. And I still have that little brass casing in my memento box. But that was a big motivator. I was a little disappointed. We didn't have, I was from the Midwest. We didn't have a conducive culture where we had a lot of opportunities like that. Even that was a little taboo, unfortunately. Yeah. But I'm surprised. I thought trap shooting, I didn't have that opportunity growing up. If I was a Cub Scout or Boy Scout, I'd love to do that so much because it's very similar to golf. It's very fun. It's very, it's just impossible to master, but it's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, so obviously it's fun teaching somebody that sort of skill, and seeing somebody develop some competency in that area, which is good, and like I said, how to be safe with it. And I think the other thing is too, I mean, if you look at it's scouts in general, right? I mean, its demographics have changed over time.
Oh, really?
And well, I mean, think about it. I mean, at least in the U.S., I mean, it was you go back 100 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically, reflective of the composition of the people who make up the United States, right? And
Yeah.
what you see now is, whereas, we see a much higher number of Indian or Asian-based populations in scouting, and many of their parents came from different countries where, gun laws and things like that were different, so they have a different expectation and they have a different understanding of things. So maybe more hesitancy there, but again, when you're teaching a kid how to respectfully and properly handle a firearm of some kind. You see some cultures a little bit more hesitant than others to allow their kids to do that. Some do and some don't, right? So I think that's what I'm saying. We've seen just maybe fewer kids and maybe interested because maybe it's family or cultural history or bias, and I don't think it's anybody's. I've never run across anybody who's super anti-gun, or at least they've not been verbal about it. But maybe they're more interested in archery or something instead, right? Another skill where you still do something along those lines, and you're still developing a respect for some sort of thing that some people would consider a weapon or something like that, right? But
it is fascinating how even it's 2022 everywhere, but even in the United States, just geographically, there's so much cultural differences as well. Because I know, like, when we'll go trap shooting, sometimes we'll see the local high school team, and they have that. Where I grew up, there's no way you'd have that.
Yeah, so it's just it's just different. So anyway, but all those things are fun to me, right? Scouting, volunteering, they just trying to make a difference in the lives of developing future leaders of our country.
Absolutely,
it's pretty rewarding, right?
I mean, I still have my old Boy Scout uniform and the red vest with you got to collect all the patches. Yeah. It's incredibly rewarding. I learned so much in my leadership and survival skills. It's probably one of the most important organizations in my life when I think about it in terms of the benefit I've got from it. I mean, it's invaluable. It's an invaluable institution. They do a lot of great, good things.
And everybody holds up that, obviously the pinnacle there is like getting your Eagle Scout or whatever. But, again, it's still only 4 or 5% of the kids who start like in Cub Scouts, go all the way through Scouting, get their Eagle Scout. But, I'm an Eagle Scout, so I believe in, kids trying to get it. It's a goal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think any exposure to the program, even for a couple of years, like get first class done, get some of the basics done. There's still skills that you learn. It's still an early exposure to leadership topics that hopefully just get you a little bit of a leg up or set you apart, earlier in your life than you might get those skills later, right? And I don't know, just maybe it accelerates that leadership development a bit.
Absolutely.
And and honestly, it helps some kids figure out they don't like leadership. Yeah. Right, which is just as good. I mean, one of the things we have a problem with in the world is that there's this high premium placed on leadership. A good leader knows when to follow too.
Absolutely.
And, there should be a really high premium placed on people understanding, if I have to make up a word, followership, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that one is bad over the other. They're just different skill sets that people have and that people can be effective at. So, I think helping people figure out, at least early in their life, if they really, really just don't like leadership, then they know they can direct their career, direct their studies, or direct whatever they want a different direction. Those kids who do like it and do gravitate toward it, they can figure out how to amplify it through that program and, carry it on in other activities that they do in extracurricular activities and then into college or university or trades or work or whatever. So I don't know. I just think it's important from that standpoint.
Absolutely. Then tell me a little bit more about the rock climbing, like, because I grew up where all my experience was indoor. Like I remember at my University of Iowa, we had at the time it was one of the largest indoor ones, or the tallest, and it's a lot of fun. But I know that's an entirely different breed from actual physical rock.
Yeah, they're very different. I mean, a lot of the techniques are similar, but things just feel different, right? When you're on a man-made, wall that's near vertical or inverted a little bit, and you've got well-defined handholds to work off of, even if they're small, It's still different than when you get on, you know, real granite. I mean, I've done some climbs that, you know, people call them like a friction climb. You look up at the rock and it's like there's no handholds at all, and you wonder how on earth do you even climb that. Well, you know, it's got somewhat of an incline to it, but really you learn to trust your shoes and it gripping literally the tiny little crystals of granite and, you know, rock crystals that are in there, and your fingertips are more for stability, and you're just moving up, you know, slowly on what looks like there's no handholds at all. You know, and every now and then you find something that's you know, that's a little easier to grip and move to, but you know, it's just a very, very different feel. The thing I like about both of them, though, no matter which one you do more than the other, you know, obviously getting outside's nice, right? I mean, it's, you know, being in a gym all the time is good and fun or whatever, but getting out and, you know, doing the climb someplace or someplace new, you know, gyms tend to be somewhat repetitive. Even if they change the handholds often, you're still in the same facility all the time.
Same angles on the wall.
Yeah,
usually.
Similar sort of thing. So they vary the handholds up. But, you know, if you're able to go around and climb in different places, then, you know, the scenery changes, the challenges change. You know, I think the thing that's interesting about both of them, whether you're climbing, bouldering, indoor or outdoor, it's like, you know, it's a mental puzzle as well as a physical puzzle. So it's a unique blend of challenges for your body at the same time. You know, you can be on a treadmill and, okay, great, you're having maybe a physical challenge, but is there really much mental challenge to it, right? Some people find that boring, some people find it exhilarating, but, you know, if you're working out how to get up a cliff face and you're climbing, you're dealing with the physical aspects, and you're dealing with the mental aspects of, you know, trying to noodle out how you're just going to get up this route.
Yeah.
And that's different for every person. And while some of the placements of your feet and your hands might be the same, or end up being similar, it's still a challenge nonetheless to noodle through. And I think the other unique thing about it is we spend so much of our lives worried about the past or thinking about the future. And when you're doing something like that, you kind of have to be right now. So it puts your brain in kind of a different mental space than most of us spend our time in on a regular basis, especially if you're in, like me, you're in business. I mean, you know, my brain's already out, you know, a few quarters from now and into next year, and it's always kind of that way. And, you know, kind of doing something that's like right now is really it's just really refreshing for your brain mentally, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and then out of curiosity, do you go up and down the same way or the same path, or do you sometimes, does it vary?
Well, most of what I do is called top rope. I don't do any of what's called lead climbing. So, you know, once you climb a route, you get to the top of a route, you know, you're attached to a rope. Somebody's just lowering you down, right? Okay. So it's not like you down climb. It's just they lower you down off the rope at that point. So, so you're not really following a path down. You're just being lowered.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. And then what are your thoughts on free climbing?
I'm fascinated by it. People, you know, by it, and people who love to do it. Little too, again, risk mitigation, a little too much risk for me in terms of damage. So it's not an area I've ever really pursued.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It scares the hell out of me, but it fascinates me too.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and there's, you know, there's lead climbing where you still got a rope, right?
Yeah.
The difference is in top rope, your anchor point, your master point's always above you. So if you fall, there's always something catching you.
Yep.
If you're lead climbing, you're bringing the rope with you. And, you know, there's an anchor that you've set somewhere below you. Well, if it's 5 feet below you and you fall, you're falling 10 feet, right?
Yeah.
Or well, anywhere between 5 and however many feet you are past that anchor point, right?
Yeah.
You know, and there's always the risk that those anchors come out. Obviously, it's really good risk mitigation that you've got to be setting those. I just don't have a lot of experience at it. I've never had much of a desire to do that. And then you've got the totally free climbing, you know, where people don't use any rope at all. And my brain just doesn't even go there. That's so anti-risk mitigation that it's not something we would ever do with young people.
Yeah.
So it's not in my DNA. And then, you know, for me personally, I like the thought of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And free climbing and falling and, you know, dying or something like that are not really compatible with my brain. So, right.
No, it takes a different gene. It fascinates me because I'll listen to interviews where they're like, oh yeah, he just climbed up this mountain and all he brought with him was a little container, chalk bag.
Chalk bag.
That's it.
People who do it, like I said, I'm fascinated by it. It's not for me, right? So I get enough enjoyment out of the top rope climbing and, like I said, the physical and mental aspects of it, and that's good enough for me. So
there you go. And I know we gotta get going soon.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead. Thank you, Don, so much. I appreciate it, man.
Sure.
Perfect. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on as number one.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again soon. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks again.
Take care.
So thank you everyone for listening. Don't forget to click the subscribe button, like, and tell your friends. Stay safe and have a good night. Topping Talks.